The wooden doors creaked as I pushed them open. My shoes tapped against the polished floor, each step echoing in the silent courtroom. I walked slowly, my back straight, though I could feel the weight of every eye turning toward me. My daughter, Clara, sat in the front row beside her father. The moment she saw me, she rolled her eyes, her lips tightening in that familiar way that said, "Why are you even here?" I didn't answer her expression. I never did. Instead, I let my gaze wander across the room. Lawyers shuffled their papers. A clerk looked up in mild curiosity. But it was the man seated high above them all, the judge, who caught my attention. Mr. Barlow. The instant his eyes met mine, he froze. The pen in his hand slipped, clattering against the wooden desk. His lips parted slightly, as though he had seen a ghost. He leaned forward, staring at me, his brow furrowed in disbelief. For a moment, I thought he might call the hearing to a halt. His throat moved as he swallowed hard, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he muttered something. "Is that her?" The words were so soft most people didn't catch them. But I did. And so did the clerk sitting close by, whose widened eyes gave him away. The entire courtroom seemed to shift. People glanced around, confused. The lawyers looked up from their files. Clara frowned, glancing from the judge back to me, irritation etched on her young face. She clearly didn't understand what had just happened. But silence fell. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that carries more questions than answers. I stood there calmly, though inside, I felt a storm building. My past, locked away for years, was pressing at the edges of this room, daring to break free. Clara folded her arms, whispering something to her father. He gave a dry chuckle, shaking his head, as if this moment meant nothing. But I knew better. The judge was still staring at me. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the gavel, then stopped halfway. It was as if he couldn't bring himself to look away. I lowered my eyes, choosing the seat furthest from everyone else, and sat down slowly. My pulse thudded in my ears, but my face remained composed. The air grew thicker, the tension sharper. No one said a word, but their silence spoke louder than any accusation. They had never known who I really was. Not Clara, not Gregory, not anyone in this room. And yet, with one shaken whisper from the judge, the walls I had built for years felt dangerously close to crumbling. The courtroom, meant to be a place of order and law, now stood in uneasy stillness, waiting, wondering who I truly was. Before we continue, hit the subscribe button so you never miss the next gripping story. Clara wasn't always this cold toward me. There was a time, long ago, when her tiny hands clung to my dress, when she used to look up at me with trust in her wide eyes. But those days vanished the moment her father filled her ears with his words. I still remember when Clara was 12. She had just returned from a weekend with Gregory. I had baked her favorite, warm bread rolls with honey. She walked into the kitchen, glanced at the plate, and wrinkled her nose. "Dad says you don't know how to cook properly," she said, sliding onto the chair with an attitude too big for her small frame. I froze for a second, the smile on my lips stiffening. But I didn't argue. I only placed the bread closer to her and said softly, "Then eat it, and tell me yourself." She took a bite, chewed, and I caught the faint sparkle of pleasure in her eyes. But just as quickly, she forced it down and pushed the plate away. "It's okay, I guess," she muttered, her tone dismissive. That was the start of it, the slow, steady pulling away. By the time she turned 15, Clara no longer asked me to walk her to school. She didn't want her friends to see me. She said I looked too plain, that I dressed like an old woman, even though I was only in my 40s then. Her words stung, but I stayed silent. I always stayed silent. Gregory, with his silver tongue, had a way of twisting everything. In his stories, I was the dull shadow, the one who held Clara back. He made sure she saw him as the exciting, important parent, and me as the one with nothing to offer. One evening, when Clara was 17, she came home from a debate competition. She had won, and I was so proud I rushed to hug her. She pulled away, embarrassed. "Don't make a scene, Mom," she hissed. "Dad says you should just clap quietly. You don't understand these things anyway." The words cut deeper than she realized. But again, I stayed quiet. In her eyes, I was ordinary, forgettable, someone to be tolerated, not admired. And yet, what she never knew, what Gregory had carefully hidden, was that I had once been someone. Someone people didn't roll their eyes at. Someone who once held a name that carried weight. But I never told her. I wanted her to grow up normal, free from the shadows of my past. I wanted her to live her own life, unburdened by who I used to be. Still, every sharp word, every dismissive glance, every sigh of irritation, it piled on. Until standing in that courtroom, watching her roll her eyes at me again, felt like the cruel conclusion of all those years. She thought she knew me, but she didn't. Not even close. The gavel struck once, sharp and clear, and the trial officially began. "Court is now in session," Judge Barlow announced, his voice steadier than before. Yet, as he spoke, I noticed how his eyes flicked toward me again, quick but unmistakable, like a man who couldn't help but glance at a scar from the past. The case on paper was simple. Gregory, my ex-husband, was accused of hiding money. Years of unpaid debts had finally caught up to him. Clara sat proudly at his side, as though her presence alone could shield him from the law. Gregory adjusted his tie and smirked, a man too arrogant to see the danger in front of him. His lawyer began listing evidence, but Gregory kept leaning back, throwing me sly glances as if daring me to look ashamed. I didn't flinch. Instead, I folded my hands neatly on my lap, my face unreadable. For years, I had trained myself not to react, not to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing my pain. Still, the whispers had started. I could hear them, law clerks exchanging quiet words, lawyers murmuring between themselves. They had noticed the judge's reaction to me. They wanted to know why a man known for his iron composure had faltered at the sight of a woman so ordinary in their eyes. "Your Honor," Gregory's lawyer was saying, "the claims against my client are exaggerated. He has always been transparent with his finances." Judge Barlow lifted a hand, cutting him off. His gaze drifted again, landing on me. For a heartbeat, he didn't look like a judge presiding over a case. He looked like a man staring at an unanswered question. Clara shifted in her seat. Her irritation showed in the way she kept crossing and uncrossing her legs, her impatience visible to anyone watching. At one point, she leaned close to Gregory and whispered something, her eyes rolling in my direction. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew their meaning. "Why is she even here?" Gregory chuckled softly, loud enough for me to catch it, as if the trial were some private joke. He had always enjoyed trying to humiliate me in public, and Clara, poor Clara, had learned to laugh with him. But the judge wasn't laughing. At one point, he paused the proceedings altogether, removing his glasses and setting them down slowly. His eyes scanned the courtroom, but always circled back to me. His lips pressed into a tight line, as though he was fighting to keep a secret. When the lawyer for the opposing side presented the first stack of documents against Gregory, the judge nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. I could see it. I could feel it. That unspoken recognition between us was growing heavier, and though no words had been said aloud, I knew, deep down, the day was coming when silence would no longer protect me. And when that day arrived, Clara would finally see me for who I really was. The session broke for a short recess. The bailiff's voice rang out, dismissing the courtroom for 15 minutes. Papers shuffled, chairs scraped, and people rose to stretch their legs. I stayed seated. Years of practice had taught me that sometimes silence is the strongest armor. But I could hear them. Whispers, low and curious, carried through the room. "Did you see the judge?" He looked pale when she walked in. "Who is she?" I didn't look up, though the corners of my mouth almost curled into a smile. It had been a long time since anyone had wondered about me. For years, I had been invisible. Now, suddenly, the weight of old memories was stirring curiosity in strangers. Clara, of course, noticed the whispers too. She turned sharply in her seat, glaring around the courtroom as though daring anyone to keep speaking. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Then she spun toward me, her voice a sharp whisper. "Stop sitting there like you're important," she hissed. "You're making people stare." I met her gaze calmly. I didn't reply. Her eyes narrowed, frustrated at my silence. Gregory placed a hand on her arm, chuckling low. "Don't waste your breath on her, Clara," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "She thrives on pity, always has." I let his words hang in the air. People could believe what they wanted. I no longer had the need to defend myself. But Judge Barlow was another matter. When the recess ended and he returned, he looked as though the break had done nothing for him. His shoulders were stiff, his steps heavy, and when he sat, he rubbed his temple with a hand that shook just slightly. He tried to mask it with authority, but his eyes betrayed him. At one point, he called the lawyers forward, but while they spoke, his gaze kept flickering toward me. A man sitting behind me whispered, "Why does he keep looking at her like that?" And that was the question. Even Gregory noticed it now. His smugness faltered for a split second when he caught the judge staring at me longer than at the papers in front of him. Gregory's jaw tightened. He leaned toward his lawyer, muttering, his eyes sliding back to me with suspicion. Clara, however, only looked annoyed. She whispered to her father, "He's probably just distracted. Mom makes everything awkward." But I could tell. This was not distraction. This was recognition. The air in the courtroom felt different now, like everyone was waiting for a string to snap. The whispers grew bolder, and the people who once ignored me now glanced my way with guarded curiosity. Still, I remained composed. Because the truth, the one I had buried for so long, was not theirs to pull from me. It would come out only when it was ready. And judging by the way the judge's hands trembled as he lifted the next file, that moment was drawing dangerously close. The courtroom was unusually still when the session resumed. Even the hum of whispered chatter had faded, leaving only the scratching of pens and the occasional cough. Gregory sat tall, his chin raised, wearing that smug expression he had perfected over the years. Clara leaned against him, arms crossed, her glare darting toward me every few seconds, as though my very presence offended her. But Judge Barlow looked different. His hands clasped tightly on the bench. His jaw shifted as if he was grinding his teeth, wrestling with something inside him. His eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, kept flicking to me, not with judgment, not with suspicion, but with recognition. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Before we continue," he said slowly, "I need to ask a question." The lawyers looked up, startled. A judge interrupting a case in this way was rare. His gaze locked on me. "Madam," he said, his voice quieter now, though it carried to every corner of the room. "Would you please state your full name for the record?" My pulse quickened. My lips parted, but no sound came at first. For years I had avoided speaking that name aloud. For years I had hidden it, for Clara's sake. I could feel Gregory's eyes burning into me. Clara shifted, confused. Slowly, I rose to my feet. The wooden chair scraped softly against the floor. I stood tall, steady, though inside my chest thundered. "My name," I began, letting the words hang heavy in the air, "is Margaret Hale." The moment the name left my lips, the reaction was immediate. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Papers rustled. A clerk nearly dropped his pen. Even the bailiff straightened, eyes wide. Gregory's smirk vanished, his face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Clara, bewildered, turned sharply toward him. "Who?" she whispered, but the judge knew. He leaned back, his hand gripping the bench as though to steady himself. His voice trembled when he spoke. "Margaret Hale. The same Margaret Hale who—" He stopped, gathering himself. His tone shifted, full of awe. "Who once dismantled one of the largest financial empires in this city." The room erupted. Lawyers murmured in disbelief. People in the gallery craned their necks to look at me, no longer with idle curiosity, but with shock and respect. I remained still, letting the weight of the truth settle. "Yes," I said simply. "That was me." Clara's face paled. She looked between me and her father, searching for an explanation that wasn't coming. Her lips trembled as realization struck. Her mother was not the dull, ordinary woman she had believed all her life. Gregory's fists clenched on the table. For the first time, the arrogance slipped. His voice cracked as he muttered, "You said you disappeared, that no one would ever know." I turned my eyes on him, calm but unflinching. "I disappeared because I chose to," I replied, "not because I was forgotten." The courtroom fell silent again, but it was a different silence now. One filled with awe, shock, and the heavy knowledge that everything had changed. And for the first time in many years, I stood not as someone dismissed